and there's not been a global government, but we're going to get there again. Guess what? Gold will be the currency of the new Roman Empire. Now, by the way, we may not go back to the days where we carry gold in our pocket and trade it. I don't mean that, but gold will well likely be the backing for whatever that currency, for whatever that one world currency becomes. All right, now, let's go back though. We're back in ancient history again, and now civilization has pretty much agreed, with the exception of the, lost tribes and distant people groups and things like that. Civilization has pretty much agreed that gold is going to be the medium of exchange. But gold has some inherent challenges or at least inconveniences. Gold's heavy. The more of it you get, the heavier it is. Try carrying lots of gold around in your pocket, and it's heavy. It's also hard to measure. It's hard early on, the value of gold began to be associated with its weight. And if I had a big chunk of gold, and I wanted to give you some gold but not my whole chunk, I had to divide it somehow, right? So, and that was not always convenient. Some of you, when you begin to study pirate lore, you'll hear the term pieces of eight. Where did that term come from? There was a large gold coin that they would cut into 8 pieces, and they would pay that out in small pieces at a time. In some of the early ancient civilizations, they would have gold not necessarily in a bar, but they would have gold in, what you might call fingers. It would be a crudely shaped piece of gold, perhaps about that long, and it may be about the size of your finger or a little bigger. And if they wanted to pay a piece or a portion of that, they would cut a piece off. You just cut a piece off that finger of gold, and that's what you'd weigh it, and then you would give that to whoever you wanted to give it to. So gold was heavy, it was difficult to carry, it was hard to proportion out. You don't always have a scale handy. Now, number 2, it was also dangerous to store without adequate and elaborate protection. We're on your outline number C. The fill-in for number 1 is heavy. The fill-in for number 2 is dangerous. It was dangerous to store without adequate or elaborate protection. Now, what I mean by that is pretty obvious. Gold had value to it. Are you just going to put it in the kitchen cabinet? Are you going to stuff it under your mattress? Right? Going back into ancient times, literally, they had to hide it. Whether they were going to bury it or whether they were going to hide it, you couldn't carry it all with you necessarily all the time. And so how are you going to store it? And how are you going to protect it? And thieves would break in and steal it if they knew you had it and if they knew where it was. And so gold becomes the standard for currency, plentiful enough that we can all have a little, scarce enough that only a few can have a lot. But carrying it around is inconvenient. Dividing it up is inconvenient and not real accurate. And storing it becomes dangerous. So what are we going to do as the system advances? Now we begin to see the birth of the banking system and paper currency. Finally, somebody gets the bright idea. You see, humanity, we're a creative bunch. You know why? Because God created us, and we're a creative God, and we're created in His image. Interesting in the Bible, if you go back to Genesis, when they're building the Tower of Babel and God breaks up the party. Did you ever read that passage? You know what He says? He says, I'm paraphrasing of course, but read the passage. He says, you know what, I'm going to break up this party because if I don't, there'll be nothing they can't do. God Himself recognized our creativity and our perseverance because it's the way that He made us. Unfortunately, at that stage of the game, our hearts had been corrupted by evil, and so the creativity had evil intent behind it and not holy intent behind it. But as the monetary system begins to unfold, and in ancient times it isn't much of a system, it's just we're all trying to figure out how to carry, divide, and store our gold. So somebody gets the bright idea, hey, you know what? I will build a fortified dwelling. and I will store people's gold for them. I am trustworthy, right? I'm known in my village. I'm known in my town. I'm not a schmuck. People like me. I'm gonna build a fortified dwelling. I will live there. And if people want to store their gold with me, I'll watch over it. That will be my day job. And that way, they don't have to. I might even hire a couple of people, right? We'll stay up all night on watches, or, we'll maintain the doors or the windows. And so for a fee, because I got to build the dwelling and I got to make a living, and if I'm not doing anything but watching their gold, that's my, so for a fee, I will let them store their gold in my fortified dwelling, and I'll watch over it. So then, you, with your gold, I'm going to pick an arbitrary number. You'd have $100 worth of gold. You would bring it to the man who's now decided to build a fortified dwelling and keep it for you. And you would give it to him. And he would keep a small portion of it. And honestly, I don't know what the early percentage was, but for the sake of illustration, let's say you give him $100 worth of gold and he keeps $5, right, to watch over it for you. But we've got to have a means of record keeping, because I've just given him my gold. And I mean, brother, I trust you, but we need to have something in writing that illustrates the agreement we have between one another and verifies the amount. I don't want to drop off $100 in gold. Now, you're going to keep $5, and I know that, and we agree. That means my balance with you is $95 in gold. But when I come back, I don't want there to be any argument or fuss. What was 85? No, it was 95. What was 75? No, I want us to know that I got $95 worth of gold with you. And so he says, hey, no problem. I will take this piece of paper or parchment or wood or whatever it is they want to write the record on, and I'm going to give you a receipt. You left with me Brian Johnson left with me $95 in gold, and I'll put my name on there since I'm the one keeping it. Here you go. Wow, what a cool system. Now, for a small fee, I no longer have to worry about carrying my gold. I no longer have to worry about keeping it safe. For a small fee, which I'm willing to pay, somebody else is going to do that for me. Now, I come across you again, and you have something that I need. It's cold outside, I need a coat. It's dangerous outside, I need a sword. Or I'm hungry and I need some food. Here, let me pay you. You say, well, I don't want your note, I want your gold. Right, okay, I'll be right back. So now I take my note, I run back to the person I'm paying to keep it safe, and I say, hey, I need some of my gold. He says, hey, no problem. Brings my $95, puts it on the counter. I saw off another $5, give it back to him. He has to write me a new receipt for the new balance. I now have $85 of Brian Johnson's gold, and he signs it. I now have a new receipt for the new balance. I bring my $5, I give it to you, and I buy my coat. The system was easier than carrying heavy gold, dividing heavy gold, protecting valuable gold, but it still isn't convenient. You see the problem with the system, right? Because every time I want to buy something, I literally got to run back, cut off a new piece, and get a new receipt, and okay, so time progresses, and somebody gets the bright idea, and it was a bright idea, hey, wait a minute, your receipt actually represents your gold. Why don't we just trade receipts? And instead of having to run back and forth and cut off a new piece, why don't I just give you a receipt that I will sign that represents $5 of my gold? So when you come to the guy who's keeping my gold, you give him a receipt with my name on it for $5, and he'll give you $5. And so we move from a system of actually trading the metal to a system that's paper-based, where we're actually trading the receipts. See how this is working? By the way, what do you call this place? A bank. That's right. That's all it was. That's all the early form of the bank was. Right? Very honest, very legitimate, providing a service. Number 2 on your outline, the birth of the banking system in paper currency. A1, a fortified place of business charged with storing the standard currency. Business is your fill-in there. Number 2, a fee is charged for storing and protecting the currency. Fee is your fill-in for number 2. Number 3, a receipt is issued for the balance stored. Receipt is the fill-in for number 3. B, so that's the birth of the banking system. Really, obviously that was the beginning. Those were primitive days, but that was it. Quite frankly, although the system is sophisticated and glorified, it's still pretty much that, right? Now, the birth of paper currency. B, Roman numeral 2b. Notes became IOUs that served as the receipt for the currency stored. It wasn't long before those pieces of paper were called notes. If I pull out, don't let me forget that, sweetie. If I pull out a piece of modern American currency, you know what it says on there? It says Federal Reserve note. This is the eventuality of this paper receipt system. The paper receipt, in its origin, represented literal gold on hand. The paper receipt represented $10 worth of gold that I own. And rather than carry that around, I carried around a receipt that said a note, an IOU for Brian Johnson worth $10. So then instead of trading the metal, we're trading the receipt. Number 2, these IOUs are also awkward in that they must be brought to the bank and exchanged for real currency or gold. Soon, number 3, patrons began to trade the notes themselves as currency, since the notes in fact represent real gold. If the note is proof of my gold ownership, rather than us running back and forth, I'm just going to give you my IOU, I'm going to sign it, and we'll trade IOUs. We do that with confidence. Why? Because it represents real gold, and we're saving the time and trouble. And the value of the piece of paper is truly whatever's written on it. Because the piece of paper is literally just a note, an IOU, for that actual amount of, in this case, gold, precious metal. All right? Now, here's what starts to happen. Even though we're a creative lot, and even though there's a lot of ingenuity between us, we're a sinful lot. And it doesn't take long before our creativity can become sinister. It's the sinful nature. It's who we became when we rebelled against our God. So, can you see in this system the potential for deceit very early? Right? Let me draw it out for you a little bit better. I am the guy who built the fortified place, and I'm storing your gold, and I'm watching over it. Me and maybe another employee or two. There are no windows and only one door. I want to keep it safe. Bottom line is, none of you know what's in here. That's part of how I keep it safe. Nobody knows whether I've got $1,000 in here or $1 million in here. And you only know how much you have. You don't know how much I have in the building. You only know what part of it is yours. And I'm giving out little pieces of paper that tell people, or parchment, or hide, or whatever it was. I'm giving out little pieces of paper. That's the only way any of you know what's in here. And I get a fee for every transaction. I get a fee every time we trade little pieces of paper. I'm tempted to issue more paper than I have metal to back up. And you will never know the difference. Not only that, but I've discovered another profit center as well. Some of you aren't very good at making your own gold. You're broke, or you lost it, or you got robbed, or whatever, and you've come to me and you want to borrow some. Well, I'll loan it to you. Now, by the way, I don't mean to paint the process of borrowing as illegitimate. Borrowing is not a sin, although the Bible advises against it. The Bible says, borrow wisely, or you can become a slave to the one you borrowed from. Okay? But it isn't a sin per se. And borrowing had been taking place long before the bank was established. People would borrow from one another. So the process, but I decide as the banker to get in on that game. So what happens is this. You come to me, you want to borrow some gold. I've got plenty of it in my possession. Now, by the way, it doesn't belong to me, but that doesn't matter because it's in my possession. And you don't want to possess it. You're never going to come for it. So I'm going to take a small piece that you'll never miss. And by the way, you've got $100 with me. If you want it, I'll give it to you. You've got $100 with me. If you want it, I'll give it to you. The only way you're ever going to know, the only way I'm ever going to be in trouble is if you all show up at the same time on the same day. That's not likely. Although it has happened throughout history. Can you say Great Depression? So as long as none of you show up, as long as you don't all show up on the same day, because then I'll come up short, right? I'm going to reach into the till back here, and I'm going to take a few dollars worth, and I'm going to let Sam borrow it. Now Sam's going to give me a note that says he has $5 or $10 or $100 of my gold, and I'm going to charge Sam another fee called interest. And again, interest is ancient. People were paying interest in the Old Testament. But now here's the deal. I start loaning more gold than I have. I have, for example, $100,000 worth of gold, and it belongs to all of you in various parceled amounts, but I've loaned $50,000 in gold, or $100,000 in gold, or $500,000 in gold. I've got little pieces of paper out there everywhere. And I'm just hoping they don't all show up to claim it on the same day. And when this guy paid, I've always got a little in the till, because some of you, 1, 2, 3, you might come back and want it. I've always got a little in the till. We call this has a formal name that is used today. Anybody know the name? Fractional reserve banking. Have you heard that term? Fractional reserve banking. You hear it all the time. Here's what it means. As I'm a bank, when I loan money, now by the way, this process is dishonest. You see how it gets started. It gets started deceitfully. But fractional reserve banking is a well-established, very legal method in the system today. But this was the beginning of it. Deceit, loaning more than you have, and it became a practice in the industry. I've got my fortified dwelling, but